Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. You know, I feel so privileged. I get to talk with so many interesting CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies and organizations. Go look back at my archive. We got founders and CEOs and executives from YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, you name it. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25. And before I introduce today's guests, I just want to give a quick shout out to David Sullivan and Dave Richmond, both of whom recommended today's guest. And I also saw him speak and I was blown away. My guest is Victor Nunnemaker. He is a serial entrepreneur, investor, mentor, and coach, and board member, and most recently an apple farmer after he was able to purchase an apple farm in California's wine country. So we'll hear maybe a bit about that. But perhaps most amazing about Victor is he overcame an extremely traumatic childhood and poverty. As you will hear in a moment, he grew up in an abusive home. When he was 6 years old, his father killed his mother. And in spite of this very difficult upbringing, he went on to become one of the only ones in his family to get a college degree, the only one to get a graduate degree. He ran track and worked 3 jobs to pay for college, including at the local zoo. We'll hear about that as well. And he went on to take multiple companies public as a CFO before founding his own companies, which he was able to scale up and sell as well. He's an inspiration and example for anyone who comes from a rough upbringing. His story is extraordinary and remarkable, in part because of the rough hand he was dealt in life and the way in which he rose above it all and now gives back. So I'm excited to have him. And Victor, you know, so generous of you to share your story today. And I've seen you speak as well, to share your story as well. Let's start with your childhood. So, and this is before you were growing up with family members after the tragedy, and you had 9 brothers and sisters. That we're going to get to that later, but you grew up in a very rough upbringing.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Everybody has to play with the cards that they're dealt, and certainly the beginning of my life is not one I'd wish on anyone, but I've been very, very fortunate and had a lot of mentors and help along the way to get out of that. But it was certainly a challenge at that age. It's hard to go through that. It's hard to see that things like that happen in your life. It's hard to be in a boys' home while courts roar on and people fight over where you're going to go and live. And it's hard to grow up poor when you don't have the opportunity to get a financial education, where you are not encouraged to go off to school and get a higher education. It's pounded into you at a very young age. You get a job, period, starting at age 12. And that was and that was after growing up going wood cutting many Saturdays to get wood to both heat the house, because we didn't have central heating, and to sell the remainder to help the family, as well as hunting, fishing, abalone diving in order to have protein in the refrigerator to eat. So on one hand, it was a luxury. Most people would kill to have abalone or salmon. On the other hand, you went and got it yourself, because I remember the first time I had a steak, it was when I was an exchange student in Germany when I was 16 years old. So you just didn't have that luxury.
Mm-hmm. So you were 6 when your mother died.
Yes.
But you have memories before that?
Yeah. As is often the case, the hardest memories of your life are the ones that are seared into your brain. And as you heard me recount, probably the most poignant memory in my head is at the age of whatever it was, 5.5 or 6 years old, waking up in the middle of the night to my mother crying and walking down a long hall and down the steps into the living room where there was a big black bear rug, and my father was standing over my mother and clearly had been hitting her. And I ran to her and he yelled, "Go back to bed or you're next." And he hit me across the room. I ended up in the hospital, and wasn't too long after that he murdered my mom, and that sort of started my life trajectory. So I wish I could say that I had great memories of my childhood before that. I don't, and some would argue maybe I blocked some of them out on purpose. It was not an uncommon occurrence, and it was, as you put it, an abusive childhood.
After that occurred, you went into a boys' home for a year and a half while the trial was happening, you said, and you recall what that was like? My
father's family, and I can't fault them for that, but they fought for custody of us, as did my mother's family. And ultimately, my mother's family won custody. But during that period, my brother and I were in a boys' home while my sister was in a girls' home, and we were separated. And when the first-degree murder verdict came down and my father was sentenced to death row, we were made wards of the court, as they call it, and then ultimately my grandparents took us for a short period until my aunt and uncle could take us. And very shortly after my aunt and uncle took us in, my mom's other sister and her husband died in a plane crash, leaving 3 daughters. So those 3 daughters, the 3 of us, and then my aunt's 4 children all came together and prospered on my uncle's $28,000 a year mechanic salary.
Wow. So is that 10 kids? 10 of you?
10 kids, yes.
10 kids, $28,000 a year. And as you said earlier, the way that you survived was going into the woods. And this is in Northern California. This is Ukiah County, correct?
Mendocino County.
Mendocino County, where you're living. Okay. And you're going out into the woods, getting wood. And you mentioned if you'd see a deer, you'd shoot it, and then you'd have venison.
Yeah, we always had the guns in the back of the truck, and very often we'd see a deer while we were wood cutting, and so we'd throw that on top of the 1 or 2 cords of wood that we had just cut and split, and take that back home, and basically skin the deer and package the meat and put it in the freezer. We had one of those big giant white freezers in the garage, and it basically stored all of our protein for the year.
Obviously, financial education is incredibly important to you. You credit a lot of your success to that. You devote a lot of your time now to helping others who don't have a financial education to learn. At what point did you start realizing that you needed to educate yourself about these sorts of things?
Good question. I'd have to say it was when I got to high school in Fort Bragg. They had an organization called FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America. I don't even know if that organization still exists, but I got involved in that for whatever reason, and they encouraged me to put a resume together. And who knew what a resume was at that time? We didn't really, there were computers, but we were taking typing classes in school at the time on a typewriter, something most kids today wouldn't know how to start with. And we would do little competitions that were both local, regional, and then statewide, where we'd go and interview and do various different. So I was introduced at that age to the concept of education and jobs and so forth. And I realized very quickly as I and I was fortunate to be a good student and to excel in the classroom, that my grades could take me a lot further than getting a job. And so I got into some trouble because I was the black sheep of the family. I was told that I needed to get a job and that there would not be money for college and that there was no way that my aunt and uncle could support me. And I understood that. But I also had one of my earliest mentors was Sid Long, and my daughter is named after Sid Long. Sid Long is a man, but he happened to be my best friend's dad and also the counselor of our school. And he sort of coached and mentored me along the way and let me know that there were scholarships and there were opportunities and so forth. And so very early on, I started learning about alternatives to what I was being taught growing up, alternatives to just a job, a job that would allow me to get out of Fort Bragg, to go and get an education and to do something bigger than the small town that I grew up in offered. And nothing against the small town that I grew up in. I now have a ranch very close to that town, and I love it. And it was a wonderful place to grow up in hindsight. But you have to get out of there in order to see the world and understand the opportunities that actually exist. So,
and you did something very unusual. You actually went and studied abroad in Germany, halfway around the world, in high school, not even in college. Did Sid Long inspire that? How did that come about?
Absolutely. He actually, because of my very strong opinions, my aunt and uncle and I clashed a lot on where I was going and what I was going to do. And that isn't to say I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs. I was, went to state, cross country and track. I was an athlete and a straight A student. But I had ideas about what I wanted to do in my life. And because we didn't agree, the old speech, either you live by our rules or you're out of this house. So I left at 15. And I went and I was with Sid Long. I was living at Sid Long's house with my best friend and his brother and his parent and his mom. And one day Sid Long brought home a flyer for a Rotary international scholarship to study abroad, and said, hey, local Rotary Club is offering to send a student abroad to study. Would you be interested? Absolutely. So I applied for that, and I had to pay. I applied for it against a whole bunch of people, was selected as the number one person, thought I was going to Japan for a long time. And then at the last moment, my first choice was Germany, just because my last name, Nunnemaker, I didn't speak a word of either language. And I got to switch and go to Germany. And lo and behold, it was an amazing experience. I learned German fluently, and in a year went to a German high school, lived in a German family where my host parents didn't speak any English, which was perfect because it forced me to learn the language. By the time I left after about 13 months there, I was translating for Sri Lankan refugees in the local church, and they were paying me 15 D-mark, because there was D-marks at the time, an hour to do that. So it was a fantastic job. And Sid Long, basically, he had brought home that flyer and handed it to me. And it wasn't all easy. It wasn't like someone just handed it to me. I had to go through a panel interviews. I had to get approved to do it. And then I had to pay for my own plane ticket. So I still had to come up with $1,100, which was a massive amount of money. So my grandmother said, if you come and help me paint my 3 houses, I will pay for your plane ticket. So I went and spent 3 or 4 weeks with my grandmother painting her houses, which again, in hindsight, was the good old days. I got to spend that time with my grandmother, who was also a mentor of mine and an inspiration, and she paid for that plane ticket. So.
Wow. And looking back now, how did that experience of going away during high school, how did that shape you and shape what, direction you went in life?
Yeah, great question. If sometimes you get the question in life, what year of your life changed or altered or made the biggest impact? And by far, it was that year, 15 and a half to 16 and a half, 17 years old, going to Germany. I was exposed to so much more than I had ever could have dreamed. I was
And
placed
what city were you in Germany?
I was as a Rotary Exchange student, I was in 4 different families. So I was in 4 different small towns, but they were all in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is the sort of county, if you will, of northwestern Germany, outside of Dusseldorf, if you know where that is.
Okay.
But the name of this town that I went to school in was called Moers, Moers. And I went to the Gymnasium Adolfina Moers, which is the high school of the area. And yeah.
Cool. So you were saying kind of how it influenced you, just the massive impact on you as a person.
Yeah, Fort Bragg wasn't known for speaking languages or being very culturally diverse, and I was placed in the first home that I went to. My host father was the president and CEO of probably the largest savings bank in Germany. They drove Mercedes 500 SEL. They had a beautiful home, and 3 days after I got there, we went on vacation in the French Riviera. All sounds like something the Kardashians would do, but for me, I had never been on a plane.
Wow.
Before I went to Germany, much less done an international our vacations were camping. Loved it. I have great memories of doing that, and am super grateful to my aunt and uncle. And let me say, for all their shortcomings, to imagine that at the age of 33, which is how old my aunt was, for her to take on 6 additional kids and dedicate her life to raising us and keeping us all together in one spot and holding it all together, super, super grateful. The utmost respect for her, and I can't thank her enough. I can't imagine if we were adopted by all different people and I hadn't been able to grow up with my brother and sister. I can't imagine a life otherwise. So I was really, in some ways, cradled after that and allowed to sort of prosper and have the ability to make choices, as opposed to what could have happened. It could have gone south from there. And that's not to say it wasn't hard growing up there. And it's been very unfortunate. I've lost one of my I've lost several of my siblings to drugs and alcohol. My little brother has passed away. My older sister head-on collision due to drugs and alcohol at the same time, and took her daughter with her in the car. It has been it's been crazy, and I always have attributed where I am to the education that I was fortunate to be able to get, and always super grateful. And I speak several times a year to the Rotary Foundation I've literally spoken all over the world, and my goal has always been to give back at least twice as much in scholarships as they gave me, because they believed in me at a time when I needed help, and they helped me both as a Rotary Exchange student in high school. Later, they gave me a scholarship, small one, a couple $1,000, to go to college and undergraduate. And then after graduating from undergraduate, I got a chancellor's award at UC, and they found me and said, "Hey, we'd like to sponsor you to apply for a $25,000 scholarship to get to go abroad and get your master's." And so that's why I went back to Switzerland and did my master's and worked on my graduate studies in the Hochschule St. Gallen. It's not an MBA program because they don't have MBAs over there. It was called a SEMS program, and so I spent my graduate studies there studying that, and they gave me $25,000 to do that. So I was super fortunate, and without organizations like that, I would not have been able to overcome some of the challenges that I had. And so so to your point, I try to give back where I can, and I try to encourage both kids to reach out and fill out. There's billions of dollars that go untapped in scholarships, and I encourage Rotarians and people who are affluent and who have been fortunate and didn't have challenges growing up or have overcome those challenges to give those kids that opportunity. One of my favorite quotes is, "How many Einsteins were never discovered because they died in a village or hamlet in Africa somewhere of starvation?" And that's super sad. Where could we be? So sorry about that.
No worries. So I want to take a step backwards though, because you end up at UC Santa Barbara, also my alma mater, Go Gauchos. And but you ran track. Is that how you got into the school? And what was that process like? Just getting to college in a family where there's so many kids and no one had gone to college before.
Yeah, so as I said, I left home at 15. When I came back from Germany, I actually went to live with my host with Sid Long again. And Sid Long is the one who started bringing home the flyers. Hey, you should apply to this college. Hey, you should apply to this college. And I was a straight A student, and I did very, very well in the SAT. So I applied to a plethora of schools, and I was admitted to both Georgetown and Stanford with a half scholarship. But a half scholarship to go to either of those schools didn't work for me. So I ended up going to UCSB because I got a full scholarship, full ride scholarship. And it wasn't in track. They don't offer, it wasn't a D1 school. They didn't offer scholarships of that sort. So the track and cross country, running track and cross country at UC Santa Barbara was just something I wanted to do. It wasn't, for fun. It wasn't something I was paid to do or on scholarship. And
you also worked 3 different jobs during school in addition to running track, including, I love this, night watchman at the zoo. And I asked you got to have some crazy stories about that. And you got to tell us a story about running across a mountain lion one night.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did. I worked a lot of jobs, bussing tables, bar back at Spike's place. I helped a probably 80-year-old lady edit her book and put it onto a disc because I was also a microcomputer consultant at the lab, which is at UC Santa Barbara. And then, one of the things you had to figure out when you're working and trying to go to school is how do you combine the two and apply some leverage. So I figured out that I could do my rounds in the truck in about 17 minutes at the local Santa Barbara Zoo and spend the other 43 minutes studying. And they were okay with that because it was 4 p.m. until midnight was my shift. And so I'd get a ton of studying there. But one night, I don't remember exactly how far into the job, but I was driving around in a little pickup truck. And there in the middle of the road that I was driving on, outside of his cage, was the massive cougar, just laying there, twitching his tail, looking up at me. And I'm like, oh shit. and so luckily I had one of those brick phones in the truck, and I called the trainer at the zoo, and they had the police and the trainer and everyone down there pretty quickly, and had to capture.
Rounded up the mountain lion.
Mountain lion, yeah. So
hazards of the job, I guess. You got to be okay with that. Yeah.
Right.
That's funny. So you go off and you do the graduate studies in Switzerland. You become a CFO. At some point, are you having this hankering that you want to be an entrepreneur, that you want to found your own company?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people go and get a college education. You think if I just work hard, I'll get to the top. I'll become, if you're a finance guy, I'll become CFO, and then everything will be great. I won't have to work for everyone. Well, then you're just reporting to the board of directors. There's always someone you're reporting to in life. That never actually changes. And so I probably spent too much of my life trying to climb the corporate ladder and not really pursuing my passions per se. But I was fortunate right out of undergraduate to get a job with Pricewaterhouse, and then worked for Genentech and Oracle before going to Corio, where I was vice president of finance and drafted the S1, took them public and so forth, which is ostensibly the first cloud company. The word cloud didn't exist, but we basically hosted software for the people of the time, Siebel, PeopleSoft, and it was it had the recurring revenues. It had a really, really fast growth, multi-year contracts, all the things that a lot of people now are focusing on for the SaaS companies. They already had that. So it was a super neat experience, and to be able to go through that, to draft an S1 and take a company public and especially because we did it in June of 2000. If you recall the time, March was when the first crash
was the
happened.
peak, right?
September was the second bigger crash. Mm-hmm. And we sort of threaded the needle and raised, I think it was $180 million for the company. And so we were a totally solid company. The problem was half of our customers went bankrupt. So it wasn't that we didn't have a great revenue stream. We were profitable. We were actually cash flow positive. We had, gone through all the steps and had a totally solid model, but we couldn't foresee that half of the companies that were our customers would actually go bankrupt. We survived because we had plenty of cash, but a sign of the times was that I recall at some point we had about $3 a share in cash, and the stock was trading for $1.90. So it's one of those, I sometimes say, there's a lot of ways to make $1 million and there's a lot of ways to lose it. At one point, my options were worth tens of millions of dollars. And by the time it was all over, zero. And I couldn't touch it because there was a 6-month blackout and everything. So it's not like I did anything wrong. I couldn't sell anyway. I just took them public, and the options went from all the way up to $21 and all the way down south to $190. And ultimately the company ended up getting sold to IBM. So, it's one of those Silicon Valley stories.
Yeah. And so was it hard going from that's kind of like you're at a high, you're a CFO, you've taken a company public, to go back to scrappy, starting your own bootstrapped company, or maybe you raised venture capital. What was the first business that you started after that?
Yeah. So about that time, I had started just a business in real estate. So it was sometime in the late 90s. I got on a plane, and many people probably tell the same story, but in the seat in front of me was Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I read that book, and it just spoke to me because I was that poor kid that was struggling to overcome it. And I then really quickly read through all of his books. And, one of the things he stresses, there's 4 ways to make money. One of them is a job, and you have to trade your time for that job, and your time is limited. So get out of that and own cash flow producing houses. So real estate, own investments that are making some kind of a dividend or causing a return, and start a business. And so that's where it started ticking in my mind. I said, okay, I'm going to do, I was too naive to know you couldn't do all those things. So I just did them all and was successful. I set a goal for myself. I was going to buy 10 houses in 10 years. I failed. I only got 8 houses in 10 years. So, but who cares? I then moved into commercial real estate, buying sort of commercial buildings, and then into sort of development, partnering with people to develop. At one point, we developed 18 condo units up near Sonoma State, and did various different things. So that was the first real company that I started and pursued. And part of that I was doing in tandem with taking Choreo public. And then after Choreo, I didn't go straight into starting a company. I actually went back to a biotechnology company as their CFO and did a secondary for them, financing. And they were a small molecule oncology drug company that is no longer around. The drug sort of failed in phase 3 clinical trials. But I spent a couple of years there before actually going back and then sort of said, I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to try and figure out what I want to do. And I often quote Louis Pasteur, chance favors the mind that's prepared for it. I spent that year literally looking at a ton of different ideas, and from a financial standpoint, it maybe wrongly so, I wasn't looking at things I might be passionate about, but I was looking for things that would be profitable, because I can read the financial statements really well, like most people read a book. And so I knew what would work and what wasn't. And I came across, and I actually started adventure racing and was on a show on TV on OLN Life Network channel doing adventure racing for over a year. And during that process, it was a Global Extremes Mount Everest Challenge was the name of the show. And one of the guys on my team starts telling me that his dad bought this company and owns the patents to a bunch of technology. And I 3 weeks later, I was out there meeting with his dad, bought the rights to these 6 patents to basically horizontally saw cut concrete. So the finance guy goes into concrete. So I had to get a contractor's license. I then figured out how to horizontally saw cut concrete to repair sidewalk trip hazards to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act. And from there, we developed an app to basically track where trip hazards were in cities, started signing up first apartments and that type of thing in schools, and then later the cities. And
what a different experience, though, from drafting the S1, taking companies public to, I don't know if you were the one who was out there going to cities and explaining to them why they should hire you to cross-cut the sidewalks, but such a different experience, getting your contractor's license, all of that.
Yeah, it was a totally different experience, and that's one of the things that I've loved and value in my life is constant education. I'm always trying to do something new and learn something new, and I try to instill that in my two teenagers, that life is about learning and experiences. It's not about what you accumulate, and that if you are constantly learning, you'll be fine. And so I've never been afraid to jump into, well, biotech, high tech, auditing, then over to concrete. Now, as you pointed out, I'm a farmer. I have 1,200 apple trees. I've learned how to make cider, hard cider. I'm exploring Calvados, making Calvados. Went over to France and did a little mini one-day internship at a bunch of different Calvados producers to understand how to make Calvados, which is apple brandy made in Normandy in northern France. And I like anything that triggers my mind to learn something new. And that.
I want to ask you about your involvement in EO, because I get the sense from what you said about giving back that taps into something deeper in your psyche, the idea of giving back. And, EO is a great organization for helping one another. That's kind of the core of its ethos. But before we get to that, you mentioned you have 2 kids. How have you talked to them about your childhood and explained to them and tried to impart some of that wisdom on them, and also put it into context just so that they can understand how you were raised?
I don't know if you can. It's hard to. I don't know if you can put it into context. They are very aware of it. I sheltered them from that for the first 10 or 12 years of their life. Then I told them about it and let them ask questions and so forth. And then, as you were at the EO Talks event that I did, where that was one of the first real public forums in which I disclosed and told some stories of that. I made sure they were there so they could hear it from me in that format. I think they have a lot of respect and understanding of how incredibly fortunate they are not to have those struggles. I joke that I need to manufacture difficulties and challenges for them so that they learn how to overcome those things, because make no mistake, I think when you've overcome something like that and various other things that I've had to overcome in my life, it's an incredible confidence booster and helps you to not be afraid to fail as a farmer, or fail as a concrete cutter, or fail as a, whatever. You just feel like if I can do that, I can do anything. And so that's what I try to instill in them is just that you are incredibly fortunate. And because of that, there's a lot higher expectations. You're not starting where I started. You're starting way beyond it. And I often quote a good friend of mine who moved here at a young age from Africa, and he believes that there are 4 stages in your life, and what I call the 4 S's, and the first one is survival. And if you're born in Africa, that's pretty dang important. If you're born in America, it's almost a given, although not guaranteed. The second stage is struggle. Certainly was there, and that's basically trying to figure out. The third stage is success. And that is when you've achieved a certain, whether it is everyone's definition is different, but whether it's having your own house or just being at a successful point in your life where you have a good job, that is much further than 99% of the world ever gets. And then the 4th stage is giving back. It's that how do I make an impact? The S is significance. But how am I going to be significant in helping other people to get through those stages? And so I try to view it through that scope and lens and figure out, okay, how can I have the most impact now that I have gotten through the success period to give back and be significant for someone else who might be in the same shoes that I was or worse.
And so talk about your involvement in EO and what role that has played for you, in, giving back with fellow entrepreneurs and being a part of that community and how that's helped with your growth.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first I'd say EO helped me immensely. I joined EO because when you go from high-tech biotech and all these MBAs and scientists around you, super smart people, to concrete, no offense, but a lot of them don't have an upper degree. You're not surrounded by smart individuals anymore, and you're trying to and you miss the conversations, you miss the intellectual stimulation. And so when I discovered EO, I probably waited way too long because I was introduced to it by my friend Jay Gupta, who was a member of the EO Silicon Valley chapter, and I didn't join for another 2 years. But when I did join, literally it was like 3 weeks in, our forum moderator announces that he's selling his business and moving to Italy, and I'm like, I should sell my business. And it wasn't, I had always had it in the back of my mind that that's what I would do. I'd have an exit strategy, but but you see someone else do it and it's just like, yeah, I should do that. And so I started planning to literally that day. And I'm not that I wouldn't have done it without EO, but I might not have done it as quickly. Mm-hmm. And then secondarily, just having these amazing entrepreneurs around me who are all struggling with the same issues helped me to, deal with the issues that I had, whatever those issues were. And I found quickly that I had a lot of issues that I was dealing with that they had never dealt with and that helped them along the way. And so now as people in EO are selling their company, I've had quite a few people approach me and say, hey, what would you do here? Hey, can you tell me about that? Hey, what's the process for that? And so I sit down with literally dozens of people and now even have a presentation on selling your company and why. And it's called, the presentation itself is called Avoiding Entrepreneurial Poverty, but it includes that.
Yeah. I want to ask you about what has the dynamic been like for you coming from a poor family and being the one who's made it out, who's been successful, has a lot of wealth. What's the dynamic like for you with the family and those who haven't come up out of poverty? And I ask it in part because I know that a big part of your mission is providing financial education for more people.
Yeah. It's early on, I knew that I needed to separate myself and put distance between me and my immediate family that I grew up with. One of the things I teach my kids also is hey, you're a product of the people that you surround yourself with. And if you only surround yourself with average or with one particular thing and never expose yourself to other options, other ideas, other thoughts, you are going to be the product of that you have surrounded yourself with. How can anyone not be? So I knew that I needed to separate myself because I was being pushed in a direction that I didn't want to end up. And I knew that I wanted more than what I saw around, Fort Bragg, the town that I grew up in. And that's not taking anything away from them. And I have some siblings who have jobs and careers and are doing okay now and have come a long way. And I've tried to reach back out, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. And if for no other reason, just to make contact and establish that, they are my family, but also to help them if they need help in some way, know that I'm there and that I'm available. But one of the big things someone told me really a long time ago was we all get lots and lots of options in our life. The difference is those who choose to take those options, those who choose to pursue them, because there's a lot. Everyone in the world has a million things that go by them, and maybe it's that you're not prepared for it. Louis Pasteur again, chance favors my, and or maybe you just think it's too hard, or maybe you just don't think you can do it. I don't know what it is. I had to distance myself from, drugs, alcohol, the things that I knew would drag me down, and not going to school, lack of education, the things that I felt would drag me down. And again, I don't judge any of my siblings for choosing not to go to school, but sometimes I think you don't have a choice if you're not aware that there is one. So,
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I want to wrap up. We're almost out of time. I want to wrap up the two questions that that I always ask. And obviously, the relationships, the people around you, the mentors, they shape and guide all of us. But looking at, right now at contemporaries, looking at others that you would consider maybe peers, maybe other EO forum mates, other entrepreneurs around you, who's out there who you respect? Who do you admire? Who's you would consider contemporaries or peers or other EO members?
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably hundreds of them. So it's hard to ever just pick one. But there are people throughout my life who have had a larger impact. Sid Long was one of those people. My host father in Germany, Helmut Kruse, was another one of those. He was a very successful businessman, and we would have dinner every single night together in spite of that, which is something I've carried to my own family and tried to propagate and make sure that we have. And also just taught me about business. I mean, I attribute some of that, the reason I went into business, to having been fortunate to live with him. And then as you go along, you inevitably come across people. The CFO of Choreo, when we took them public, Eric Keller, who went on to become one of the partners at Kleiner Perkins, was an enormous influence in my life. He would, he was always there at 6:30 a.m. every morning, except Thursdays. He wouldn't show up till 11 o'clock. And after I'd been there about a year and proven myself and so forth, I got up the guts to say, where do you go on Thursday mornings? And he's like, Victor, I have a very important meeting on Thursday mornings, and you need to start going to those meetings. Do you own a bicycle? And I found out that he was cycling. And so I started cycling with him. And so he was a big influence on me because, he, just the way that he handled himself in executive meetings, the way that he held himself, was inspiring. The way he was and he did it in a very thoughtful, nice way. You get so many executives who aren't nice. We've all seen the Steve Jobs movie and various other things. Eric was anything but that, but wicked smart, and how he used comedy. I still wish I could use comedy the way he does to just lighten the moment or whatever. And certainly my forum, I mean, you're very familiar with forums. I have an amazing group around me. It's fluctuated over the 6 or 7 years I've been in EO now. But the other day I came across a photo. 2 of the people are no longer in EO, and I sent it to them. They had an impact on me. They inspired me. And, they're mentors of mine by virtue of having their own incredible, successful businesses. When you see what someone else has done or can do, it's not unlike Roger Bannister in the 4-Minute Mile, and no one thought it was possible until he broke it, and then boom, 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 you had 4 or 5 more people breaking it within months. And so that's an inspiration to me, is just seeing other people do something and knowing that I'm not afraid of hard work. I'll do whatever it takes to get there. On the investing side, if anyone's interested, a very big influence on me in the last 2 or 3 years, which is unusual as you get older to find someone new who teaches you a great deal, is a gentleman, an older gentleman by the name of Saul Rosenthal, and he has a website which is called Saul's Investing Discussions on the Motley Fool board, in which he has created a incredible community of investors who add and give tremendously of their time, and in which he posts and blogs on both his investment and, more importantly, on his investment philosophy. And he was a former psychiatrist, so psychology. And I think the psychology of investing is a really important one, especially on days and weeks like we've had this week and today, when the market is absolutely getting crushed. And I would say that he's been a mentor of mine and taught me some new tricks in investing, which have been phenomenal. And he's an amazing person if you can jump on there and read about, in addition to the things that I mentioned in Digital Porcupine.
All right, I think you answered the second question, so I won't ask it again. It was more about, like, inspiration from your childhood, Sid Long, and your host father as well. I think that answered it as well. So any final words of wisdom for anyone listening to this who wants to get more of a financial education, understand how the world works, investing works, markets works, pulling themselves up?
Absolutely. As you know, I have a website, and I try to blog on that website, a combination of what my portfolio is, and also just teaching people about stocks, about investing, about different options than just having a job. One of the things that I told my daughter, who just applied to 21 schools, is I said, I know you're going into anything but business. I said, but you will take business classes in college as long as I'm paying for it. Take the time to learn what the 3 financial statements are. And there's exactly 3 parts to each of the 3 financial statements. So 3 financial statements with 3 parts each. Learn what they are and how each one's different. I see so many businesses, multi-million-dollar businesses, with people who don't know what the 3 financial statements are. Everyone knows what the P&L is: profit, expenses, revenue, expenses, and then profit or loss. But people don't know the difference between that and the balance sheet. And then most people don't even use the cash flow statement. Just understand what the 3 are. In investing, investing, whether it's in real estate or in stocks, is critical. You're not going to get out of your JOB unless you can figure out a way to replace that income. And that's not going to be through 0.01% in your checking account. So that money needs to go somewhere. And if you're choosing to put money and invest it into a company, make sure you understand the financial statements, and you can look at how the company's doing and make sure that they're profitable. Look at the different pieces of the company, whether it's the management, whether it's the margins of the company. A company that makes $100 but has has margins of 5%, they take home $5. A company that makes $100 but has 90% margins, they take home $90. Which one's better? People don't realize that, and the one that takes home $90 should be valued higher. And so there's all kinds of things like that take an accounting class and learn the language of business, because accounting is the language of business, and be able to speak it. Just one class in accounting, and take one class in finance so that you understand it, and maybe one class in business ethics so you don't land yourself in jail.
Advice as well. Victor, this has been wonderful. Digitalporcupine.com, I know, is the website for you. Anywhere else people can go to learn more, or to connect, or to learn more about what you do?
If you want to learn about or follow the ranch, I'm on Instagram at Palico Ranch, and we are going to do Hip Camp this year a few times, and have some people up to stay in our safari tents that we set up a bunch of safari tents that are gorgeous, with mattresses and end tables and Persian rugs in them. So it's really nice glamping experience. So if you want to do that, you're welcome to follow me on at Palico Ranch. And other than that, I'm around, and the website you gave, Digital Porcupine, is, I blog that 2 or 3 times a week.
Go opt in there. And Victor, thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you, John. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.